we're going to be in Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3, we've looked at the first couple chapters so far, and we've learned about Daniel and his three friends, young men who were taken into Babylonian captivity. And the Babylonians were trying to force their way of life, their society, onto these three young men. And how did they respond to that? Yeah, they resisted. They said no. That's exactly right. And so we then go on to read that Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and he calls for the wise men of Babylon. And what does he ask of them?
Tell them the dream and the interpretation of the dream.
Yep. He says, tell me the dream that I had and tell me the interpretation of it. They could not do that. They thought that was an impossible task, and it is. It is an impossible task. If you were to tell me or ask me to tell you what you dreamed last night and then the interpretation, I would say you're crazy, because you would have to tell me your dream first before I can even think about the interpretation. However, Daniel knew that God is the only one that could do that. God knows the minds and the hearts of men. And so Daniel took a chance. Daniel said, give me some time and I'll be able to do what the king asked. And he did. Again, being a young man, that's, again, from the ages of 14 to 21, no matter what age in between there, for him to have that kind of faith is pretty amazing. And so we get to Daniel chapter 3, and we're going to read the first 7 verses to begin with. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace." Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Again, it's important to remember that the people involved here, the people that we just read about, are people like us. They're not superhuman. They're not a different kind of human. They are just like us. And if we can remember that they had similar emotions, they had similar temptations as we do, then we can really learn a lot from this. This is a story that is so needed in our generation because their faith was challenged by overwhelming odds. I mean, think about what these people are challenged with. And yet, they had courage. They had their values straight. They didn't have to wonder, should I do this or should I not do this? They were already determined they were not going to do it. They knew what they were living for, and they also knew what they would die for. Without that kind of vision, without thinking like that, we'll never be able to resist temptation. If we're not really sure what we're living for, and if we're not really sure what we would die for, then we're going to easily give in to temptation. The king made an image of gold and set it up in the plain of Dura. Dura is believed to be about 12 miles southeast of Babylon. And this image would measure today about 90 feet by 9 feet. That's a pretty big image. That's a pretty big statue, 90 feet by 9 feet. Now, whether it was up on like a pedestal or something, I don't know, but still, this would be a pretty big statue. But Nebuchadnezzar gathered all the people of his kingdom to come to the dedication of this image. Now, let me ask you, who could resist? Who could resist this invitation?
No one.
Right. No one. No one. Do what?
It was by force.
Yeah, it was, an invitation, but it wasn't like, the RSVP kind of thing. No, it was, you're going to come.
Might be a better word.
Do what?
Command might
Yeah, that's exactly right.
voluntold.
Yeah, voluntold. You better be here. And so this man, Nebuchadnezzar, he was a powerful monarch. And he was tremendously successful as a general who never lost a battle. So you can imagine his head is like this, very prideful. And he reigned 40 years over Babylon. And his shrewdness is recorded for us. But the importance of this image is shown by the fact that it was made out of what? Gold. Think about that. This 90 foot by 9 foot statue is made of gold. And he sought a united kingdom to worship this gigantic idol whenever they heard the sound of music. So if we're in here and all of a sudden we hear the music start to play, we better get up and get out there. Now. Don't wait. We better get up and get out there now. And I want you to think about this. Not only is the king's command overwhelming of itself, but if you refused, if you said, I'm not going to do this, what are the consequences? Not just any kind of death, a very painful one. You would be suffering. The death in the fiery furnace was intimidating. I mean, could you imagine if we opened the curtains up and there was fire back there, and you were given a command, if you don't bow down right now, we're going to throw you into that fire. When we have a bonfire, we don't like to get too close. What happens if you get too close? You can feel it, and it's like, ooh, that's hot, Being thrown into a furnace is, that none of us here, I don't think, have ever been tempted with anything like this before. This is pretty scary. And it's very hard to argue with somebody who says, if you don't do this, you're going to be thrown into this furnace. Very hard to argue. But then when you look at verse 7, it says, therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image. So, peer pressure. Peer pressure. Notice it said all the people are doing this. What's easy for someone to do when everybody else just go along with it? That's exactly right. If everyone else is doing something, very few people have the strength to do something different. It's very hard. You think about young people. They get invited to a party, and everything's fine, but then all of a sudden, alcohol starts being brought out. Everybody's doing it. And everybody's now looking at you. You see, you're put in that position of, well, maybe just one. Maybe I'll just go along with everybody so I'm not picked on or made fun of or anything like that. So, again, it's very easy to give in to something like that. Society, if you think about it, I mean, it's a monster. It really is. It commands that you do what others do. That's what our society says. Just do what others do. And we can't do that. And so, again, you see the same thing with Babylon. It's the same exact thing. Some things just don't change. At the sound of the music, all the people fell down to worship by the thousands. Not just a few people here and there, but there was a lot of people. Now let me ask you this. Do you think that there were people who fell down and worshiped this idol knowing it was wrong?
Yes. Just about everybody there, because they were from different regions of the world and they had their own beliefs.
Right. Right.
Even though this wasn't really a religious, well, it was kind of in a religious context. It was more of a, Nebuchadnezzar was a narcissist and wanted to be worshipped as a god, just as the Egyptians themselves had been worshipped as gods. And
Right.
So that was where it was going to. But these people, most likely every one of them were thinking in their head, no, this is not right, but I'm going to do it so I don't die. So.
Right. You have some that are thinking, I'm going to do this because I don't want to burn to death. And then you have other people that are looking at other people doing it, saying, I'll just go along with everybody else. Robin?
Who were they most directly afraid of? Those around them. I mean,
Right.
the big guy wasn't actually looking at them, and they couldn't see God, so they forgot to be afraid of him. But they were afraid of those around them.
Yeah.
Sounds kind of familiar.
Oh, yeah.
Over and
Absolutely.
over again, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
They were afraid of those around them. That was during, World War II.
Mhm.
Or who were people were, you were afraid of me, you were afraid of those around you.
Right.
The more recent thing, who were people afraid of?
Yeah. Yeah.
Friends, family, those right around them, church members, or those afraid of everybody closest to them. They
Yeah.
forgot about who they should really fear.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
This is such a vivid scene on the plain that's flat land, right?
Mhm.
And here's this 9-story golden creature up there. And if you don't fall down, you're really obvious.
Mhm.
And it's not like you can get lost or you can say, well, I'm going to do this, but God knows my heart. I don't really mean it.
Right.
You know, it's glaring.
Oh, yeah.
It's like you can't just melt it. You melt it to the crowd by falling down.
Mm-hmm. Right. You know, and the Bible talks about how, we are to follow the laws of the land. And there's some laws that we agree with, some laws we don't agree with, but we are to adhere to the laws of the land. We may think that, 60 miles an hour speed limit is too slow. But, we're supposed to follow the laws of the land. Except when?
Against our belief in Christ.
That's exactly right.
That's the only reason we have to resist capital authority.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so you have, in this case, this is the law now. Babylon, you're going to bow down, but this goes completely against God because now you're worshiping something that is not God. If you look at verses 8 through 15 now of Daniel chapter 3, it says, Therefore at the time certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, there are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? So the Chaldeans held a prominent position in Babylonian society. And so when they accused the Jews, it was no doubt to appear as patriotic service. when in reality it was prompted by, I think, jealousy and envy. And so, what did they inform the king about these three men?
That they had not paid homage to the statue.
Right.
Also, did you notice that they conveniently left out Daniel?
I don't know why Daniel was left out. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if he was with them at the time when they got caught. I don't know.
I think it had more to do with what he had already done in chapter 2.
It could be.
And he had already found favor with Nebuchadnezzar. So
Right.
They knew that was a non-starter.
Right. And that's a very good possibility. That they overlooked it with Daniel. Charlie?
It's interesting that they do not refer to them by their Babylonian names. They
Yeah.
switched. They're Jews, after all, they're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. And so they informed the king here that certain Jews, notice that certain Jews who had been given positions of importance in his kingdom are not willing to bow down to this image. And their refusal was very disrespectful to the king. Now, again, why Daniel is not included? I mean, Russell brings up a good point. I don't know. We're not told why Daniel was not included. But anyway, the king, how does he feel about this? Yeah, rage. It doesn't say that he was just mad or upset or angry. It says in verse 13 that Nebuchadnezzar in furious rage. He is not happy. He is not happy at all. He can't believe this. I mean, if you were the king and you said, if you don't listen to me, if you don't do this, I'm going to throw you into this furnace right here and you are going to burn alive. And somebody did not do what you asked, what would you think?
Might you be threatened by their bravery? Might have felt a little threatened.
Possibly.
Afraid that might catch on.
You take somebody who's very narcissistic, somebody who is, I'm better than everybody else. I'm powerful. You will do what I say. You're going to look at them and you're going to think, are you crazy? I just told you that I'm going to burn you alive. And all you have to do is simply go to your knees before this image. That's it. I'm not asking you to do anything difficult. Was that command a difficult thing to do? No. Bow down before this image. And you're not going to do that, and the punishment is fire. You're going to think that they're crazy. And so the king asked Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego if this was true. He gave them an opportunity. And so, again, the king may have thought that he was being misinformed for him to ask them, is this really true that you're not doing this? Again, nobody would dare disobey a king's command. And so he's asking them this question. But what does the king do in verse 15? He shows his fairness by giving them another chance to show their loyalty. It shows that he liked these men. For the king to say, I will give you another chance. Don't mess up this time. It shows how he feels about them. Besides, what's the last thing he says? At the end of verse 15.
Ask about the God who would deliver him.
What God is going to deliver you from this? Can you see that kind of sarcasm in that? Yeah. What guys, think about this. I'm going to throw you into this fiery furnace. What God could save you from that?
The funny thing about that is he had already, that particular God, he had already said that he is the God of the heavens and the earth.
Right.
But I don't think he was familiar with these two fellows. I mean, his interaction had been with Daniel.
Yeah.
Daniel interacted with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Right.
Told them what he had done. So I'm making assumptions here, but my assumption is this is his first interaction with his personal interaction. He had other people that were dealing with them and saw that they had done well during their brooding phase, I guess. So they had been set in positions of some authority
Yeah.
within Babylon.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, Jim.
That's why I was just thinking, his concept of God is a God that he had created.
Yeah.
And maybe himself. You know, he probably thought of himself as God.
Mhm.
Or somebody. And he knew he couldn't save him, or his created God couldn't save him from the fire.
Right.
So therefore, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it could be one of those situations where, you know, we have people in this day and time to do it. Or, you know, you think about when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, these people knew that Lazarus had been in the grave for days, and they see this man come out of the tomb. They witness a miracle. They witness somebody who was dead come back to life. And what did they try to do? No. You know, they tried to kill Lazarus. You know, and this could be a situation where Nebuchadnezzar, he understands, he's already acknowledged God, but he can't do this.
He's committed.
Yeah, right, exactly.
There are certain people that once they're committed to the lie or whatever perception is that they have, they're going to go full tilt with it.
Right.
That's crazy.
Yep. When you get to verses 16 through 18, remember, these are young men standing before a king, and look at their answer. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Did they just really say that to a king? Yeah, I don't need to answer you. Wow. Wow.
Do you think that they was thinking that God would deliver them physically or spiritually?
Well, you see where they said that God will deliver them, but if not. So I think they didn't know. They just knew that they weren't going to bow down. Spiritually, I think they knew that God would be with them. Physically, they probably thought that they were about to be burned alive. But they, like when they said in verse 18, but if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your God or worship the golden image that you have set up. So God will deliver us from this, but if he doesn't, they still knew that, you know, they were doing what God wanted them to do. But again, to say that to a king, you know, I don't think many people would say that to the you know, a king or even the president today. If the president asks you a question, or if the King of England asks you a question, I don't think anybody would have the nerve to say, I'm not going to answer you. I don't need to answer you. Because, I mean, and there would be no repercussions on our part. It would just, you know. But again, with these guys, knowing the punishment, to say, yeah, we don't need to answer you in this matter. They did not need further consideration or discussion. This was a closed subject. We're not going to do it. We are not going to do it. We don't need to give you an answer. We're not going to bow down. It's not going to happen. And you know what? Many could have rationalized their situation, and many people probably would compromise. They could have argued, you know what? It's useless to resist. And I mean, why throw away opportunities at a high office? You know, I've got a pretty good job here. You know, all I got to do is bow down to my knees. That's all I have to do. So, the idol is nothing except just a symbol of political homage, right? I mean, there's so many things that they could have thought and compromised to save their life. They could have said, you know what? We could just do it one time. We'll just do it one time to make the king happy. Besides, we're going to do more good living than dying. Again, they could have rationalized all these things. Death in a fiery furnace, and that's asking a little bit too much of my faith, right? Well,
You know, they are just as committed as he is. I mean, they make the statement, if our God does indeed exist, he has the power to rescue us.
Yeah.
But even if he doesn't, we're still not going to worship him.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
I think Gigi had her hand up.
Oh, so I'm sorry.
They already got it, so basically, it was just that, I forget, Nebuchadnezzar probably didn't know that Daniel was worshiped the same God as those three, and that it just showed what kind of faith Nebuchadnezzar had in his own gods.
Yeah.
That he didn't have faith in his own gods, because he didn't think anybody could save him.
Right. Oh, very good point. Carol?
A few thoughts. One, I saw that science technology has just gone so far out in space that images that have never been seen before been able to be picked up by measurements that say what they're looking at is 150 million light years away, just whatever the number is. And a lot of other. But doesn't that make us think about how vast God is without beginning and without end? And that it is a spiritual worship. This is a great lesson before we move forward in our service today. Here we are to worship. Here we are to bow down. Here we are to say that he's our God from the song. But I just think about that and how vast he is. It's just without, we can't think of it. And then that Christ, who is in the creation, left that to be like us, who are just specks in the wind. It is amazing that we can speak to that God, that he knows our thoughts and what we're doing. So I'm just impressed with here we are to worship, and that it is the spiritual worship. It's not all those other mumbo jumbo things.
Yeah, it is amazing, you know, when you look at, like Carol was talking about some of these images, and you know, we think we're so big, you know, but you put the sun next to the earth and it's like a little speck. But then you put another star next to the sun, and the sun is now a speck, you know. So, yeah, very powerful, very vast, beyond our comprehension. I mean, it really is. Verses 19 through 27 here. Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." And he answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over their bodies, over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. And so in verses 19 and 20, you see that the king is so furious that he orders these flames to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. And he commanded that these Hebrew boys be bound up and thrown into this fire. He's a little angry. And so they get thrown in there, and it was so hot It was so hot, when they opened the door, what did it do?
Blew out onto the soldiers that were escorting them and killed them.
Right, right. So again, picture yourself as one of these three men. You're about to go into this. The door is open. Fire comes out and consumes the ones that are about to throw you in there. And you know you're about to go in there. Again, that's a pretty scary picture. But again, when you think about it, the miracle of God's deliverance is made all the more astounding by the fact that the soldiers died by the fire, whereas with these three men, not even a single hair on their head was singed. Their clothes still looked as good as when they walked in there. And then when it talks about the smell, I'm sure we've all been to a bonfire before. And when you leave, what do you smell like? You smell like smoke, right? They didn't even have a smell of fire. Russ?
I got one thing to say on this passage. This is also kind of a preview of what you see, and even Revelations, if I've been to Revelations, where fire is always used to burn off impurities. The guards were not men of God.
Right.
They were Nebuchadnezzar's henchmen. They immediately get destroyed by the fire, while Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are saved. They are the pure ones to God. So you can take that away from this. This is one of the first times that fire is used as, that burning away of that is not good.
Right. That's a very good point. Very good point. And again, when you look at these young men and the challenge that they are up against, could you imagine? Let's just say again, the ages of 14 to 21, but let's say they're still a teenager. Any age for that matter, but let's say they're a teenager, or 17, 18 years old at this time. They're standing before this furnace. And what do you think an 18-year-old today would do if they were told, you're going to be thrown in there?
Just go ahead and kill me here.
Yeah. Or what do you want me to do? I'll do it, right? And again, with it shows the courage of these men, because in this day and time, if you don't do this, then we're going to make fun of you. If you don't do this, you're going to lose your job. If you don't if you don't do what we say, then fill in the blank. None of us have ever, or probably will ever, face anything like this. And again, next time you see a fire, Duke, being a firefighter and gone into many fires, he probably can appreciate this even more so. But we get close to a fire, it's hot. We can feel it before, we even, nobody's ever tried to touch it. But, we feel the heat. And these young men are told, all you have to do, it's not difficult, bow down before this image. That's it. If you do that, you're fine. They refused and were even willing. Now, again, at that point, I don't think that they knew that they were going to be delivered from this fire. At this point in their minds, they knew God, He has the power to deliver me, but He may choose not to. Abraham, when Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac, he didn't know that God was going to stop his hand. But it also says that Abraham knew that God could raise Isaac from the dead. He knew God had the power to do that. He didn't know if He was going to save him or not. These three men didn't know if God was going to deliver them out of this fire. And they were willing to go to the death for their belief in God. Did you have something, Jim? No. Any other thoughts?
What would have been perhaps the potential consequence of them bowing him? What might have been the consequence there? Would have been the same, except eternally.
Yeah.
So, do you want a small burn or a big burn?
Right.
So, when you get
Yeah.
down to it, that really is the choice. Now, were they thinking that? We don't know. but they seem pretty wise and smart and determined. So I would think that that logic crossed their minds.
Mm-hmm.
They were familiar with the scriptures. They understood. Kind of burn for a short while, or maybe eternally.
Yeah. Yeah, very good point. All right, we are out of time. We'll pick up right there next Sunday.